Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Martin was attempting to do an RGB mod on a PAL N64 using Tim Worthington's board, and everything seemed to go wrong. At first, it seemed like it was going okay, but then they noticed some pins were bridged together, so they tried to fix it and ended up pulling the encoder up a tiny bit. And then when they tried to clean it up, they think they got everything done correctly, but it looks like some pins are still shorting together. And that's rough. I've been there before. Those N64 advanced mods are very complicated, and those pins are very, very close together. And you really need some kind of magnifying glass or microscope in order to really even see the pins clearly. And then you need to, of course, be very careful with your probes to make sure that you're touching the pins themselves and not the pins next to it. And that's something I've absolutely done before, where I'm trying to test continuity, but I keep slipping and touching other pins, and it just makes it really hard. So this is one of these things where, depending on your console and your skill set and whether you're afraid of losing it, you might want to stop. And I mean this with love and respect. I'm absolutely not mocking you. In fact, if you talk to any of my friends that are better than I am at soldering, they'll all roll their eyes when I say that, because when I stop, I give my projects to them to help me finish. So this is something that happens quite a lot with me, where I'll get to a point and I realize I've hit my wall, and I'll just go, you know what, this is expensive and important to me. I don't want to ruin it. But on the flip side, there have been some very cheap generic stuff that I've been working on where I was like, you know, if I ruin this very cheap thing, it's a good learning experience and I could just salvage it for other parts. So I keep going. Now, an N64 motherboard, it's a bit expensive to do that with, but if this is something that's important to you and you really want to try honing your skills and continue to do this stuff, you might want to keep going. But at that point, you've kind of done everything that I would have done, in that you've used a heat gun to very carefully heat things up. You've tried to check continuity. The only thing I would absolutely do is buy a cheap $2 magnifying glass off of Amazon, anything that could really let you zoom in. Because while I've told the story a million times, I'll skip to the end, in that I didn't realize my eyesight was going until I destroyed 2 computer motherboards. 2. And it wasn't until the second one where I was like, all right, I know this is me, but what exactly am I doing here? And I took a picture with my phone, and my iPhones usually have a pretty good macro mode automatically built in. And when I zoomed in, I realized I couldn't actually see the pins that I was trying to clean up and work on. I thought I could, because my eyesight was perfect all the way up until I was like 42 or something like that. So that's when I realized, oh boy, I need glasses. And if I had just been using a magnifying glass or a microscope, or even those like jeweler's things that you could, like the visors that you could flop down in front, I would have realized that. I didn't know. I went 40 something years with never needing that before and always being able to see really tiny pins without a problem. But so I don't know. That's going to be up to you on how you proceed. But if you want to keep going, without a doubt, use magnification of any kind. The cheapest stuff, the good stuff, whatever. Use your heat gun very carefully. And you might even want to use something like Kapton tape to cover the components around it, just in case a little excess heat goes out of the way. You don't want it to accidentally blow off a component. Because I've done that. I've literally been doing the use your heat gun as a wand thing, and my hand slipped and the air pressure blew off a surface mount, 2 or 3 surface mount capacitors, and I couldn't tell which one went where. So it was a nightmare to try to replace that. Also, you know, like I said, if you're at a point where you're like, this is a rare and expensive thing, I don't know what to do, try to find a modder that's experienced in this stuff. And repair work's always going to be more than just the mod, but if it's really worth it to you, I guess that's fine too. But honestly, this is one of those things where I wish I could be more help to you, and I wish I could have some kind of magical solution. But this is really the wall that most people hit at some point, where it's like, what do we do? Do I try to learn how to fix this? Or if I'm just going to mod this one console and never again, let me find somebody to repair it and kind of go from there. But if you wanted to keep going, I would also try with some more heat. I would absolutely use magnification and check that the pins are lined up on the pads. None of the pads are ripped up. And then I would let it dry for a little bit, and, you know, used a little bit of compressed air too. and turn it on and see what happens. And don't forget with N64s, I've done this so many times, but if you don't have the memory pack in there, either the generic one that comes with it or the expansion pack, it will not boot. I can't tell you how many times I used to do like the HDMI mods or the advanced mods, which was right at my limit of skill set at the time, by the way. But I would do it and I'd get everything in and I'd put in Super Mario 64 and I'd hit power and nothing would happen. And I'd go, and then I'd kind of wait a minute and go, oh, wait, the expansion pack. So I'd power it off, put the pack in, turn it on, and everything's fine. So don't forget that as well. But yeah, this one's rough. And, I hope you ended up getting it sorted. And if it was something silly, definitely let us know, because it's always a fun thing that other people might want to learn. Last week, DW623 was talking about a CRT that once they moved to a big city, they were starting to get weird wavy lines on the side, and they were worried about interference from different places. And they said they have tried now in SNES and N64, different surge protectors, composite and S-video cables, different inputs, and it all had the exact same issue of wavy bacon-looking corners and the image twitching along certain horizontal segments. They don't really want to move it because they're on a third floor walk-up apartment and it's a 150-pound TV. So that's definitely something that you don't want to be messing around with unless you have very strong friends that don't mind helping. So it's just one of those things like, okay, what do you do now? And that one was already recapped by RetroTech, by Steve. So they're hoping it's not the caps, but that's both good and bad. That's good because it probably isn't the caps then, and if it is, it should be something very visible. Maybe during the move, it got jostled too much and something hit or something is wrong. So if you felt comfortable opening the back and looking in, you could do that. But please don't forget the whole thing that I always warn people about. The chances of death working on a CRT that's not been properly discharged is not zero. The chances of death while modding your Super Nintendo is absolutely zero unless you do something like plug it in and mod it in your bathtub. It's a pretty strong idiot factor with modding consoles versus CRTs. You could absolutely even go near the anode cap and get shocked. And Steve showed a video on social media recently where he slowly was inching his discharging wand, his screwdriver that was modded for that, close to the where the anode cap goes in, and it sparked loud, like an inch or two away from it. So I just want to drive that point home. Don't be messing with CRTs unless you really know what you're doing or unless you know what to expect. But if you have no problem with that, unbolt the back, even if you slide it halfway off and shine a flashlight in and look for any physical damage, that would be very easy if it was something like that. Even if you weren't comfortable doing it, maybe you could have friends come and help you and open it up and work on that. But the fact that it's probably not caps means it could be other stuff. So I would contact Steve directly and see if he's seen that issue with that model CRT before. Maybe there was something else that was going on with it, but it seems like you've already put a lot of money and time and effort into it. So I would keep working on it a little bit more just to see what you could do, because a big calibrated capacitor replaced CRT is going to last a long time, except for small issues like this. So I hope it's just something small and not one of the chips on the neck board or something like that. But DW also had another question. Since it had been almost a year since they had booted up that old unit, would it be more responsible for their next CRT, or if they repair this one, to boot it up more regularly, like once a week or once a month, even if you're not gaming on it? And the answer is yes and no. And it also depends on environment and situation. So for me personally, if I move a CRT other than just on my wheel carts around the room here, if I bring it to a friend's house, bring it to a storage area, and I bring it back, absolutely. I'm going to power it up. I'm going to make sure it still works. I'm going to do the most basic test. Plug in a Nomad, have the Sonic the Hedgehog one screen running, and just leave it playing for a couple of minutes to make sure there's nothing crazy and everything looks and sounds okay. But once they're in a secure location, like for me on my wheel carts, if I don't need to use it, I just don't power it on at all. And in fact, I leave it unplugged from the wall completely, just in case lightning ever strikes the house. I don't want to zap anything that's plugged into the wall. So I wouldn't bother. However, what if you have it stored, in a basement under a staircase where you never know what could be going on, or you have to put it in a corner in an apartment next to a heater. So there's all that extra heat that could be drying out the caps every day in the winter when those heaters are on. Yeah, it might be worth just checking it to see. And if you start to see things like wobble, maybe it's, I have it right next to this heater that's running 24/7, drying out the board and all the caps in it. maybe that's something that's worth checking. So sorry I couldn't be more of a help here. I would definitely contact Steve and show him that video and see what he thinks about this, but I would just try a little bit more to see if you can get this going, because you already put so much effort into it and it seems like a cool set. Next, Rent Optional has been using Dawn Power Wash the last few months to clean console shells. It does an amazing job, especially on dingy NES and PlayStation shells. They're curious if there's any long-term issues from using it. Not that it's been out that long, but here is the ingredient list that they were able to find, which I'll put this on screen for anybody that's interested, because they're really just looking to see if any of these chemicals stick out as being dangerous to consoles or plastic in general long-term. And I don't know enough about this stuff to tell you for sure, but I can tell you that when it comes to cleaning with soaps and stuff like that, my personal experience, which is quite a lot of consoles, but this is not like the definitive answer. This is my very, very subjective answer. But my personal experience is, regardless of the cleaner, if you wash it off very well and you make sure there's no residue left, if there's no damage right away, I haven't seen any damage. I haven't seen something where like retro brighting where you just leave it out in the sun. That still is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And the people who have done that, they come back in and their consoles look fine. They feel a little weird, and then a year later they're all just crumbling and falling all apart. So I have never run into any of that with cleaning with any kind of dish soap type of detergent or anything like that. I think once you've done the cleaning and once you get all of the soap out and you dry it properly, I have personally not seen any long-term negative effects of that whatsoever. And I don't expect there to be any. But once again, that's a guess and that's subjective test results. So if anybody knows anything, then please let me know. I don't ever want to talk in definitives unless I've done some serious research on it. But I think you should be fine. I think the only time you would ever have to worry about cleaners is if there's abrasives in the cleaners, or if there's any kind of like bleaching agent in it, which it doesn't look like it, but maybe, I'm not really sure. But once again, if there was a bleaching agent in it, you would probably start to see results either immediately or within a couple of days. And Rent mentioned that they've been using the Dawn Power Wash for the last few months. So my guess is that's a totally fine solution, but please, anybody who knows anything different, chime in and let me know. I'll put up a big warning or something if I got this one wrong. But in the decade plus of stripping down consoles and using dish soap to clean them, and doing it all properly, not getting labels wet, drying it, making sure all the soap is off, drying it, yada, yada, yada. All of that has been just nothing but positive for me. And the only time I've had any weirdness is if I put any kind of plastic protectant on it, which often protects the plastic but leaves it with like a greasy residue, which I think is fine for the plastic but drives my OCD crazy, so I don't use that one, but that's all up to you. But yeah, I'll leave a link to the very, very, very old video I posted for console cleaning, which is funny. I think it's one of the first ones I ever did, but it's still relative. You just strip everything down, make sure there's no metal, don't scrub. And use a soft plastic brush. So many people saw that video and they're like, oh, you idiot, you're going to scratch your console. It's a soft plastic brush. You're not scratching anything with that thing. Next up, 2 Milligrams was looking to convert the signal coming out of a PC to either S-Video or Composite. And I read through your entire post and I tried my best to follow it, but I think one of the confusions that you're having is how these different converters work. And it might be best if I just break that down for you and everybody listening. So first, you can get those generic converters on Amazon and AliExpress, and those generally add a bunch of lag, but they do everything that you need very well from every other perspective, as long as you consider cost in that. It'll downscale signals, it'll convert them to composite, and do a very good job without it looking kind of crazy. And the only two real downsides for what you're talking about would be that it only goes to 480i, not 240p, and there is about 2 frames of latency added. Then you have the other generic converters, which are exactly like the ones I always talk about. They require 15 kilohertz. So they require you to output either 480i or 240p. And the scenario that you explained, the going with an AMD GPU with CRT MU driver, that would work totally fine. And those will convert to S-Video and do an excellent job. And all of the ones that are available to purchase now do a just fine job with composite video. I heard there was one out there that was a little bit better than the rest, but it still isn't going to be great because you have to dial in the correct signals, or otherwise you get crazy colors all over the screen. And that brings me to the one Ivory from Retro Castle finished 2 years ago, so I'm still not sure why it's out. I'm pretty sure Ivory's just swamped with real work stuff and hasn't had time to swing back to this, but I'll nudge him one more time because I have it sitting right there and it works really well. You put SCART into it. So if you're coming out of the AMD GPU, you would just get a VGA to SCART cable like the one Mike is selling, the RetroTink cable, or you'd get an HD15 to SCART, but cheap, all things relatively speaking, a cheap adapter that goes into that, and then you would use the variable capacitor to dial in composite. And coming from a PC, you might only have to use that once and never again. And that would be a really great way, and it retains whichever signal, 240p or 480i, doesn't add any latency whatsoever. You could even use it with light guns, which on a PC side of thing, I'm not really sure how that would work, but if you had a console that you're inputting, that would also work. And you can select PAL and NTSC. If you're just going to S-Video, there are generic converters out there on eBay and AliExpress that do the same thing. They just don't do a great job with composite. So if you're going to S-Video, there's already pretty cheap, under $50 or under converters that can do all of this. But then you get onto the MiSTer stuff, and you need to remember that the mainstream way to do that now, the way that most people are doing it, it's being done in the FPGA. The developer Mike S had built this software, in the FPGA to convert the signals to Luma, and then use that software to also convert it to composite video. And then when you're talking about Luma traps, that's a piece of hardware on the converter that's designed to work with Mike's software. And Mike worked on that for a while. It eventually got rolled into the main MiSTer code. So at the moment, it's fairly easy. You just get one of those adapters, and you should be able, you set your MiSTer to output S-Video, and then the adapter itself is what helps convert that to composite. But while there is an adapter with some hardware on it, 95% of the work is being done in the FPGA. So any of those adapters that you see that are talking about that stuff will not work with a PC. It'll only work with MiSTer. But there were a bunch of people that did design the generic converters as well that work with MiSTer and basically anything. And that's the one I was talking about before that. So I think you need to decide before you move forward, how important is composite video? There is one other converter I haven't tried yet that supposedly works pretty well, certainly better than the other generic ones for going from RGB, from 15 kilohertz to composite. I haven't tried that one yet, so if composite's important and you need it right now, you might want to give that one a try. But if you really are just going to S-Video, any of the generic ones that allow you to select between NTSC and PAL should work. One last note though, none of those convert NTSC to PAL or vice versa. It just allows you to switch whatever the input signal is to match the output signal. And generally speaking, any of these converters, even the cheap ones you get on Amazon, which I'll be showing in that upcoming video, it's the same scenario. You can't input NTSC and output PAL or vice versa. It just, you match whatever is the input, and that's what you get on the output side of things. So hopefully I was able to clarify at least a little bit for you, and please let me know where you need me to fill in the gaps. Richard Kingston has a question about hardware modders. Why do YouTube creators seem to think that modders are a dime a dozen? They can't seem to find one that will RGH their Xbox 360, let alone one that they would trust. Well, they are a dime a dozen. I think the problem might be that you're looking in the wrong place, and you could possibly just be asking the wrong questions. So, going in the comments of somebody's YouTube video is absolutely not the place to find a modder. You're going to want to go to the communities that it's relevant to what you're doing. So if you're looking to mod your FAT360, you wouldn't go to an Atari 2600 forum. You would go to Discord servers, Reddit posts, which is another rabbit hole, forums, all that other stuff. But you go to the communities that you're looking to get this stuff done, and you find people who have taken the time to post about their work, and you find people who have a reputation of being able to charge fair prices, do the work properly, and get it back to you in a timely manner. One of the biggest issues people have is a modder gets popular, then they get overwhelmed with repairs, and now it takes 6 months for people to get their console back, and everybody's unhappy. So that's something that definitely needs to be avoided. But really, that's just the only thing that you need to worry about. Now, it could be that you just live in a place where nobody in your driving distance does what you're looking for. And that stinks. I mean, it definitely happens. But then you just need to find people that you could mail your console to that are trustworthy, that have experience with this and have a reputation. And the best place to do that, is all of the social media that usually drives me crazy, but you kind of have to rely on these days. So I would just suggest going to any place in your, meaning, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, whatever, going to any Xbox 360 centered place, talking about or going into the modding section and seeing if anybody there is in your area or close enough to you that it wouldn't cost, a gazillion dollars to ship your console out, and go from there. And then just, ask other people, hey, who's used this person before? Do you have pictures of the install and stuff like that? And if everything, generally speaking, if everything looks okay, it probably is. There were a few people out there that were notorious for making artistic installations where there were cold solder joints, bridged connections, but the wires looked pretty. But that's not nearly as common as when you just open up a console that's been modded and you just see a rat's nest that anybody with common sense could go, that looks horrible and unsafe. So basically, pictures that look okay, people that can confirm they got their consoles back in a timely manner, decent and fair prices, and just look where the relevant places are. So, I mean, if you still have issues like that, I don't know. That's a hard one, because I know a ton of people that do RGH mods, but they're all in this area over here, and they're all pretty busy, but they would certainly be able to do it. But that's New York City area. I'm not really sure where you're located. So yeah, I don't know. I would try in the communities that are most relevant and then try to find people local and kind of just go from there. Apothecary 2 said, it sounds like the current conventional wisdom is that any CRT effects will be ruined by stream compression. Is that always true in all cases? Yes, but let me continue. Are there any kinds of scan lines you can get away with on a stream, or any settings that would mitigate the downsides? Sometimes it feels like if they had an audience, they'd want to show off their preferred look for a game, but that would be fruitless if it doesn't come across well. So in almost all cases, this is just not going to be possible in a live stream scenario. With pre-recorded video, there's different tricks you could use. You could zoom into the image. You could try to take video of a CRT, and there's downsides to all of that. But when you have a live stream, it needs to compress the video on the fly as it's going out and then being distributed with this compression applied, in real time. So there's no possible way that these compression algorithms could see these CRT filters and just define each individual pixel to keep it looking the way it does on your screen. So that's why doing something like just showing footage of a CRT effect, even in a pre-recorded video most of the time, is going to look terrible. But when I do something like zoom far in, so let's say I have a pre-recorded section of Super Mario World and I do a 4x scale of the 4K video with the scan lines on, the full CRT mask on it, what you're actually seeing on your screen are large defined masks over the image. So even though compression is applied, it's not a pixel by pixel thing. You've been zoomed in, so it doesn't ruin it as much. So, but that's just not something you would really want to do in a streaming environment. So no, I just don't think it's possible. Now, I've shown this on live streams before, and I've then looked at the YouTube window during the stream, and sometimes it looks equally as bad as I'm saying, and sometimes you get a couple of seconds where it looks pretty cool. There are some other downsides to it, but basically, if I were streaming a game, I might throw on some effects here and there just to kind of show the example, while always warning people if you're not watching it in full screen in 1080p or 4K, it's not going to look right, whatever. But I would never rely on that as something in the stream. Also, there are cases where adding filters kind of mess up the encoding, and OBS doesn't really know what to do. It's especially the case with the static on the default boot screen for Mister has that static CRT background. That drives streaming crazy, and I've seen streams drop as a result of it. And I think while it's not what you're talking about, it's the perfect example of explaining what's going on. So it was a really long way of saying, no, there's probably no way to do that. And even in pre-recorded video, it's really hard. But if it's something that's important to you, just flip it on for a couple of seconds here and there during your streams and just let people know, like, hey, this is what I see, but it's probably going to be ruined on your end. But, hopefully you can get a glimpse of what it looks like on my end. Jason D has a couple of questions. I'll start out with a fun one. Have I taught myself any songs from video games on guitar? Yeah, I used to do that all the time. I would just go and read the tablatures and play them. But I distinctly remember being a kid, not too long after I started playing guitar, maybe 2 years or something, where I taught myself by ear the Legend of Zelda theme song. And I did it with like different picking techniques where I barred the frets and then used multiple fingers to do the opening and then switched to a pick to do the main theme. But then I experimented with different places on the neck and different cadences to get the feel right. Like it was, for an adult that plays guitar, it's laughable, yes, that anybody could do that. But for a little kid who was trying really hard to learn this stuff, it was a big deal for me. And it was something I distinctly remember. And I got a recording of it somewhere. I don't know where I originally took the recording, but it's somewhere on my PC somewhere. And I haven't listened to that in decades, but hopefully it's not gone. Hopefully it's still in just an old Bob's Stupid Riffs folder or something like that. But yeah, that was always a lot of fun. The technical question Jason has, though, is on a scale from 1 to 10, what odds would I give any company to manufacture new CRTs? And it's 0. Absolutely, without a doubt, 0. Because you have to understand, this is technology that's over 50 years of evolution. And there are multiple pieces that had to be built from scratch in order for this to happen. So when this happens naturally as an evolution, you have different companies that are popping up, each competing to be the best at whatever piece that they're making. You get giant companies like Sony that at least one point had built every single piece of the CRT, even if they sometimes outsourced one or the other. They had the knowledge to do that, but they also had the training and the testing and the means to get their money back. So right now, even if Sony, let's just say one of their executives went nuts and said, I miss CRTs, let's try to make some. And let's just assume they kept all of their documentation. They would still have to fire up manufacturing from scratch for every single piece that went into it, which means they would also have to train tons of people on how to do all of this stuff. And they would have to sell it in a way that they would at least break even or make a little bit of money on it, which means that decent CRTs would probably cost $10,000 to $20,000 each to do that, and who knows if they would ever even break even or make their money back. And if a smaller company stepped up to do that, they would have to basically teach themselves how to make every single component, and it would be the same issue. They would have to spend, $1 million to get it up and running, and in order to sustain it, these things would be 10 grand each to buy them. So I think there's 0 chance of anybody manufacturing CRTs anymore. What I think there's a very good chance of are companies making stuff that emulates the experience in a way where, unless you're hardcore into CRTs, the overall experience, look and feel would be the same. And I personally could do this right now today. I could open up a very small manufacturing facility and I could have curved screens that are mounted in the back of curved glass that are etched and tinted in a way where you get the same feel. And I'd put a, RetroTink 4K built right into that to get you the absolute look with all the default settings that makes it feel like you're looking at a CRT. That's totally doable right now. And that monitor would be like $3 grand a piece. The reason would be because in order to make anything custom like that, you have to buy quantities and then you have to hand build them and you have to pay for all of this stuff. So that $3,000 price might actually be a pretty conservative price. It might actually be a lot more than that. In order to sell something like that at great quantities or at a lower price, you require great quantities. So you don't place an order for 100, you place an order for 5,000 or more. And there's just, at that price, even if you drop the price to only 2,500, how many people are going to buy something like that? Certainly not thousands. So I don't think we're going to see any of that soon unless it's expensive in very small quantities. I hope so, but my guess is as other technologies starts to evolve, eventually you'll have true CRT emulation done in a way where the look and feel is the same, but I don't think that's going to be cheap anytime soon, but I think it eventually might be. And on the flip side of things, when you have something like Mod Retro making brand new Game Boy Color screens that are the same exact resolution that work in the same way, there's a lot more that goes into stuff like that. They have to make them knowing that they might not make their money back. And when you have larger companies doing stuff like that, there's certainly ways to make that beneficial. But like if I were to do that and get the investment to go get a Game Boy Advance screen that's the exact size and pixel density as the original, just a little bit clearer and backlit and all of that stuff. There's quantities involved that you have to have them made. There's QA. It would be very, very, very expensive, and I might not ever make my money back. But when bigger companies do that, there's always things like open up one company as an umbrella under the others, and that one company loses money, so you get the tax breaks on the other company. There's all those rich people tricks that big companies do that makes this stuff okay, but you're still talking about manufacturing a screen that's still made today. LCD screens are still made everywhere all the time. You're just asking for a different size and a different pixel density and a different color reproduction. So while I'm not taking away from the Mod Retro screen, I have never seen one in person, but it does look very cool. The point is, it's using existing technology, existing manufacturing techniques, and existing ways to test it. There's nothing new going on there. So that's why you're able to do something like that. So if you said, what's the odds somebody would build a Game Gear screen that's exactly like the original? If somebody wanted to, they could do it. It might be $400 or $500 each, but they could totally do that now because they could just use an LCD to replicate essentially the same type of thing, just you could actually see it. So yeah, I would not ever count on any CRTs being made ever again unless it's like boutique shops doing a very complicated job of fully restoring originals by stripping the tubes down, maybe even rewinding them. But any of that is going to be very, very expensive. So while I know this is bad news and not the answer you wanted, zero chance of anybody making a new CRT. Anything LCD based, cool, maybe, but I think we're most likely going to just be looking towards evolving CRT emulation, which is beneficial for more than just CRT nerds. Having the image drawn one line at a time at a speed that's so fast you could produce a 60 frame per second image or higher, that's really beneficial for motion blur in gaming. So the industry isn't ignoring this, it's just too expensive to do at the moment. So fingers crossed that we'll get affordable solutions eventually, but I definitely wouldn't expect anything at all now, and certainly not new CRTs. Leslie wants to know if I have any tips for beveling your own cartridge connector. Maybe you were just making some prototypes for your own designs and they didn't come beveled, or you forgot to select the option or didn't want to for whatever reason when you were having them made. Or maybe you were one of the many, many people that spent a ton of money on a new retro game and it showed up without a beveled edge, which could slowly destroy your consoles, especially 30 and 40-year-old consoles. So that's a great question, and there's only one thing I could tell you with absolute certainty is whatever method you decide to use, do not hit the metal fingers at the end in any way, because as soon as you scratch off the protective coating that's on there, you allow it to rust and oxidize. And that's exactly the reason why I always say never ever use sandpaper or metal polish or any kind of high abrasive cleaner to clean your cartridges unless there's already severe damage done and the cartridge is unusable anyway. Unless you were actually at that point, I think I talked about this last week, that's why I would never do that. So when doing your own beveling, do not hit the metal. In fact, I would err on the side of caution on this one. But I've always chickened out. I've never been able to do it myself, and I've never wanted to. I probably could test it because I have a bunch of non-beveled PCB cartridges here that I think I was going to use for... I think I was originally going to do a video on why metal polish shouldn't be used, and I was going to use a microscope and show the differences. So friends sent me a bag of beat-up old prototypes to use. So I should probably try that at some point, but... The tips that people had given me are if you use something like a file, you have to hold the file, you have to hold the cartridge at an exact angle and very slowly drag it across. And some people are very good at that stuff. Just the same example of like you could hand some people a hammer, a nail, and some pieces of wood and a saw, and they could make you whatever you want and it looks beautiful. And you could also do that with idiots like me and it just looks like an elementary school science project when you're done with it. Some people just have the skills to do that and some don't. So one of the things that Steve from HD RetroVision told me one time when he got a beveled edge prototype of the HD RetroVision test suite and it didn't come beveled was he very carefully went outside and went on the concrete step in front of his apartment and got it at the perfect angle because the step was not moving. He had to only concentrate on holding the cartridge itself and then slowly, lightly drag it across and then flip it on the other side and do the same thing. So I don't know if I would recommend everybody go outside and start rubbing their cartridges on concrete, but I thought that was a fun story for the example that it gave. You know, you're moving only one piece, not two. Also, whatever you could use to see it better, you know, whether it's the same example I used before, you could use those flip down goggles things, the jeweler's goggles, or maybe you just already have great eyesight, which, you know, props to you if you do, but it's really hard to see these edges. And it's also really hard to photograph them too. I don't know if you've ever seen any of my shots when I show the proper and improper ways. They're always half blurry because you got to use macro lenses. You're talking about a slight bezel. And I guess the last thing is you don't need a perfect bezel. It just can't be a squared off edge, because any type of bevel, I think I said bezel before, but any type of bevel, the purpose of it is as you're inserting the cartridge into the socket, it pushes the pins away. Whereas if you have squared, sharp edges, it smashes into those cartridge connectors. And that's why you could slowly destroy your consoles that way, because eventually they're not going to have the same tension on once you've actually gotten them plugged in. So the only other thing that you mentioned was, would you need to worry about any kind of fume extractors or personal protection? And common sense based stuff, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, if you're going outside and you're doing this on concrete, just exhale as you're doing it so you blow any of the dust away from you so you don't inhale it. Whereas on the flip side, if you were doing a manufacturing facility, you would want, you know, proper air filtration, use a mask. You don't want to be breathing in that dust all day long. But for one or two, especially if you're going to do the outside method, or I guess even inside, you know, I think for me personally, I would worry more about where's all that dust going? Do I have to vacuum it up afterwards? Do I do it outside? Do I do it over a garbage pail? But that's just me. So yeah, that's all the tips I have, but I've always chickened out just because it was just too close to the pins. And unless it's something like a prototype that you're just, you know, you don't want to mess up your console as you're testing your prototype and you're going to toss it eventually anyway, or, you know, remove the chips and put it on a new PCB. And then, yeah, I kind of chickened out on that one, but hopefully I was able to at least point you in the right direction. BDavs88 had two questions about the best ways to watch 24 kilohertz content with their setup. For Blu-ray and DVD, they use a PlayStation 3 to the RetroTink 4K to an LG G3. They have the PS3 set to output 1080p 24 and not upscale anything. What are the right settings on the RetroTink 4K if it's being fed 24 hertz? Same exact as I showed in that video. Just set it to a multiple of 24. So 120, 1080p 120 is totally fine. I would also test 1080p 96 as well, depending on if you're using BFI or what your display can handle. And then just turn on frame lock or gen lock. You could try either, but if one of them takes longer to sync, just switch to the other one. But that's really all you need. Just a quick aside, your LG G3 probably does all of this nearly flawlessly on its own, not the BFI stuff though, which is why I kind of made a whole section of those videos about talking about doing this through the Tink, even though your TVs could probably already do it. Will it naturally deal with everything correctly? Yes. Do settings like VRR matter either way? Probably not if you're just talking about 24 hertz native content and proper cadence to your TV. And are TV settings important? Yes, for all of the same reasons. Now, on my LG C4, all I had to do was turn on filmmaker mode, and that's it. Nothing else changed. Or I didn't need to change anything else. I didn't need to mess with anything. And I used a slow motion camera to count the frames to prove that that's all I needed to do. One thing to note is if you're like me and you like playing around with settings, it will retain those settings. So I was watching something the other day and I'm like, what the heck is wrong with my TV? Are my eyes going crazy? So I paused it, I went into the menu and I had turned on one of the true motion settings, the cinema one, which has a little bit of interpolation, which rarely I prefer that. I usually just like it all off and just like it to look the way it's supposed to. But I'm telling you that just to say, if you've been messing with the settings, just, you know, try to make sure everything is just back the way it is. And if you have to do a reset, fine, but it's probably not a need to do that. Just go into filmmaker mode, make sure nothing else extra is turned on. Next, for watching backed up 24 hertz files from their NAS, what's the best way to play them? So that's going to depend based on the hardware that you have. I don't use the PS3 media server because I don't want to put the hours on my PS3 that I don't need to. I've used the Infuse app with Apple TV as well as Mr. MC and VLC. And if you set Apple TV to match frame rate and resolution, then it will pass everything through correctly to your TV. As far as different media players, oh, and of course the Oppo Blu-ray players would do that as well. But as far as other NAS-based players, I don't have much experience because while, excuse me, for, I don't know, 20 years now, that's been my goal, is to find one box that could do absolutely everything. The Apple TV has really been accomplishing that for me for a while. And I only really switch over to the Oppo when I want I want to make sure that everything's locked and I don't have to worry about any software glitches, but the Infuse app is a paid app. I think it's $1 a month, but it also does Dolby Vision. It does a whole bunch of other stuff that has worked very well for me. And Dolby Atmos seems to work with it. So I don't really use anything else because I haven't needed to. But other than the NVIDIA Shield, which every time I talk about streaming, everybody just jumps down my throat. Like, why don't you own one of those? Because I don't need to yet. So if anybody has any other suggestions, or if there is a new reason to get the NVIDIA Shield, then please let me know in the comments. I'm always open to it. But for me personally, just streaming files, I go right through my Oppo Blu-ray player or my Apple TV using one of those 3 apps, and that works perfectly fine. And I'll leave a link to both of those videos because I think you should probably give it a watch just for the heck of it. Even if you already understand all of this stuff, it's a refresher, and it will at the very least give you some idea of BFI and the proper settings for the RetroTink when pairing it with your G3 and other stuff that you might be able to do with it. Well, that's it for this week. Unfortunately, the YouTube community service is still down, for me at least at the moment, which unfortunately means that anybody who pays to support on YouTube weren't able to ask questions the past couple of weeks, which is awful. It's embarrassing and also makes me angry. So I'm really sorry for anybody that supports there that wanted to participate. I just honestly have no idea what to do. And if you have any issues with that, please reach out and let me know. I'll try my best to accommodate in some way, but I just don't really know what to do. And this is usually the part of the video where I say, anybody who supports on any service, feel free to ask a question. The most people join on Patreon, but some people just don't want to, so they support other places, and all are equal until now. Now apparently YouTube is screwing over their own people who pay them. I don't know. It's very, very frustrating, and I'm genuinely sorry, and I don't know what to do, but I'll just hopefully check my settings again and see if this is fixed soon enough. But anyway, thank you to everybody who participates in these. And of course, and especially thank you to people who support in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I will see you next week.